Hello there. I thought we'd do a drawing today and have a little fun. Now, I thought it would be fun if we did my favorite Xmen character, but maybe if we put just a little bit of a twist on it. Now, as I did in my last video, I'm going to start the pencils here where you can't see them very well, and then we're going to flip things around so that you can actually see the drawing itself. Let's begin. Make sure I've got all my things in order. Now, the X-Men that I'm going to be drawing today is none other than Kurt Wagner. Kurt Wagner, who is also known as Nightcrawler. Now, I kind of have two favorite X-Men characters, and both of them are kind of jumpy kind of characters, but at the end of the day, my favorite is Nightcrawler. Now, if you perchance don't know, Nightcrawler is a mutant for the X-Men, and he has blue skin, and his skin is supposed to have short fur. Now, I have never actually seen them draw the fur on Nightcrawler, and I've always found that kind of amusing, which really wouldn't be a big deal, except that they have another blue furry X-Man, and his name is Beast, or Hank McCoy. And they always draw Hank very specifically having fur, with the furry quality to him. But they never do that with Nightcrawler. And so my little headcanon is that Nightcrawler does have fur, but that his fur is extremely short. Like, I had a He-Man figure when I was a little boy, and I think it was Moss Man, and he had this very kind of velvety moss texture over part of the hard plastic. And I always imagine that's probably what Kurt Wagner's skin feels like, is that it has just a little bit. Now, what I'm going to draw today, what I'm just starting to sketch in here, is Kurt as a little boy. And as so often happens when you do these things, you draw them in their full costume, even though, of course, they did not have their costume when they were children. But we do it for fun, because why wouldn't you? Now, Nightcrawler has some pretty distinctive qualities to him that make him stand out from some of the other X-Men. In fact, most of the original X-Men, at least originally, looked more or less human. Hank McCoy originally did look human, though he did have large hands and feet. But when they added the new team, they did have some that were a little less human, and one of those was Nightcrawler. And Nightcrawler, of course, with his blue skin, his tail, which I'm drawing here, which comes to a point, his pointed teeth, and his 2 fingers and a thumb on each hand, gives him the appearance of a classic devil. And so he is often met with fear from people. But, of course, Nightcrawler is a gentle, sweet soul, and in fact is deeply religious, which is one of the things that I think is really cool, that they have this X-Men character who is also deeply religious. Now, I'm drawing this more or less from memory of what Nightcrawler looks like, but when I get to the coloring, I am going to take a peek at my iPad for the coloring, because I do want to at least get his color scheme more or less right. I mean, I mostly remember it, but I don't quite remember it altogether. Now, the other favorite character that I had from the X-Men is actually a much less known X-Men whose name was Longshot. And Longshot really took hold of my imagination. He came onto the team around the time that I started reading the X-Men. And his superpower was literally luck, is when his motives were pure, when he was trying to do things for the right reasons, he would get unbelievably lucky. But I think it's interesting that both of those characters also were incredibly acrobatic. They were both the jumpy and flippy type characters. And I think there's something about that always attracted me. I always liked those characters as opposed to like the super strong bruisers like Colossus or Wolverine. I liked those characters just fine, but they weren't my favorite. And as a teenager, I started liking Longshot better because he was, fancy and new. But as I got older, I really began to appreciate the nuance that Nightcrawler had. Now, I'm just drawing young Nightcrawler here, and he is helping himself to some cookies, because the most distinctive power about Nightcrawler is that he can teleport. Now, in every story about a teleporter, their powers all work in slightly different ways, and his works that he can only teleport somewhere that he can see. Technically, he can teleport somewhere he is not seen, but it's called a blind port. And if he gets that wrong, it will instantly kill him, which of course is a bit of a problem. So he normally doesn't do a blind port unless he absolutely has to. One of my favorite stories about Nightcrawler is when Dr. Doom, not a normal villain for the X-Men, has captured the X-Men, and he's put them in death traps. And the only reason he's put them in death traps is that he wants to see what they will do. He just simply wants to test them so that he can see if they're a danger to him. And the trap that he puts Nightcrawler in is simply a box. Simply a box that has no windows or doors. And normally, Nightcrawler would be able to simply teleport out of it. But he can't without risking instant death. And finally, what Nightcrawler does is he teleports straight upwards, because he figures, well, if I can teleport a mile up in the air, I should be able to survive, because very few buildings are going to be a mile high. The only problem being, one, he doesn't know if maybe he's super deep underground, and two, once you teleport up a mile high, you fall. And he can't save himself by teleporting alone from a fall. So he had to do some pretty interesting things to save himself. But I'll go on from that right now. Now, I've just finished my penciling of young Nightcrawler getting the cookies on the kitchen shelf using his BAMF, which is his teleporting power. And I'm going to switch things over, and we're going to show you the inking process. Now, the angle that I've got this at is not quite as perfect as I would like, but it will have to do, because I normally have a little tripod that I use to make my camera go where I want it to, and unfortunately that is missing at the moment, so I will make do with this. We're going to start with the lettering. As I mentioned in an earlier drawing, I always try to do the letters first because they own the page, because if you can't get the letters in, you're kind of out of luck. It's like when a little kid, draws happy birthday mommy, and they don't plan out the the side, and the last part is all, like the wrong size and kind of wonky, and the Y is sort of like halfway underneath the second to last letter, that sort of thing. So I find if you just do the lettering first, always, you're almost always going to be better off. Got my nice big bold pen for the BAMF, which is probably actually is my all-time favorite comic book sound effect. And I am obsessed with comic book sound effects. I love comic book sound effects. Now, I actually drew a web comic for about 5 years. It was a very silly day-to-day comic about a funny little guy named Michael Vox who had crazy supernatural adventures. But I worked in any time I could work in a sound effect, I most certainly would. Just going to do real simple hair on him. This is kind of my default hair, but Kurt has some gorgeous hair when he's drawn well. The funny thing about Kurt is that his facial features, he's supposed to be extremely handsome, which is, of course, extra ironic in that he gives off the impression when people first meet him of being a demon, because, of course, once they get past that, they realize that this gentleman is actually rather handsome. Just going to ink in here his arm. I always try to put in the things that are in the front view first, except for the lettering, of course, since the lettering, it's one of those things you don't really think about if you don't draw cartoons. But this letters here, they don't exist. The character cannot see them. And so they technically are in front of the action. Sometimes I would actually draw the letters behind something going on because I thought it was kind of fun to play with that reality. But normally the lettering pops out in front. Now what I've done is I've taken my 8, which is my thickest regular technical pen, and kind of blocked in some of his features that are more in the front. And now I'm going to show some big old eyes. Now, Kurt is typically shown as not having pupils, that he actually has, technically, he has slightly glowing yellow eyes, which is supposed to make him extra spooky. And as I mentioned before, he actually has fangs. There's a wonderful graphic novel called God Loves, Man Kills, where Kurt pretends to be evil, and you see him slowly lowering his teeth towards someone until they finally, I'll talk. But, of course, he wasn't really going to hurt them. He was just bluffing, because Kurt would not actually bite someone. He just simply wouldn't do that any more than you would. I don't think you would bite someone. Do you think you would bite someone? They do this very cheesy little curl on the tail that just kind of implies a little bit of twisting. It doesn't technically make sense, but, we're just having fun with this drawing. I know that if I had had teleporting powers as a child, I would primarily have used it for the acquisition of snacks. I don't know if it would have caused me to be immoral and steal things other than food, but certainly I think all children believe that if cookies are available, that it is not stealing. They are simply taking what is their due. Drawing in some cookies here, and I want to try to overlap them a little bit so they've got some little bit of depth to them. That helps a lot if you don't always complete the circle, but that way they kind of look like they're on top of each other. And this is a very simple drawing. We're not trying to do anything too fancy, but we're just having fun. I always liked Kurt, as I've said, and I think one of my favorite X-Men movies. I'm not sure if it's my favorite. I think that I may like the last two a little bit more, Days of Future Past and X-Men First Stand, but I really do like X-Men 2. And that, of course, includes a version of Kurt Wagner, who has a German accent, as he should. And they do a fantastic job of showing just how unstoppable a character with teleportation powers would be. Let's see, that's a pretty good basis there. I'm going to wait to fill in some of the details until I am able to make sure I've got the coloring scheme right. I'm just going to use a real simple line here to sketch in the border of the table that he's teleporting to. Swoop. We're not going to worry too much about getting these angles exactly right. I found that one of the ways that you can really show depth in a simple drawing is simply to add an extra line. If you can add an extra line, even if you don't do it very well, like I'm not doing it very well right now, it just kind of gives it a little more depth, whereas a single line tends to have a feel of sort of like a children's drawing. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I love it when well, the truth is, I say that, but my daughter, Isabel, has already far exceeded me in drawing talent. And the years that I put in drawing my webcomic, I did not achieve, a great success or anything, but it did get my daughter interested in drawing, and it's now one of her favorite pastimes. And so I definitely consider that to be an amazing thing, that I was able to give my daughter the gift of her discovering it. I didn't give her the gift of the talent. That was all her. She is incredibly talented. But just like her, I get pure enjoyment out of drawing cartoons. And that is one of the most important things, as the late, great Mr. Rogers said, that one of the most terrible things is if you don't make a thing, it just stays in your head, and then it can't come out and no one can enjoy it. And that is really a shame. I saw a friend just the other day, and she had a painting that she was working on from several years ago, and it was a gorgeous painting of the Winnie the Pooh gang. And I had no idea that she drew it all. And here's this amazing drawing. Let's see. We're missing one small thing here. Does anyone notice? It is his arm. That happens sometimes. You just do your best to work through it. Fortunately, I didn't draw any smoke lines around that. I'm going to take this thin one here, and I'm just going to draw some little wiggly shapes. And the reason I'm doing that is to kind of imply that this is a wood table that he is going to. And whenever I can, I try to draw little textures. They don't have to be anything fancy, but what I find is that they really help differentiate. I heard an amazing inker once say that carrots should look like carrots and fingers should look like fingers. That you should make the effort to make these things look different, because his point was that if you draw a poor drawing of fingers, that they will essentially look like carrots. And draw a little something here so that this is coming back from there. But I always liked that Kurt was a spiritual fellow and that he held fast. Now, there was a plot where he actually became a priest for a while, and of course, as they do in comics, they undid it. And I didn't really care for that because it was... it's one of those things where you can do stories about someone who teleports and goes into space, but him becoming a priest is a little too real and just too silly to be taken at all seriously. And of course, being a comic, they gave various reasons why this was able to happen, but it was just very silly, and I was very glad that they undid it. It turned out to be a hoax of sorts. But I always respect when they make a character Catholic. And not just because I am technically Catholic, but because there's something very specific about Catholic. If you watch in television shows and things like that, what they'll often do is have the minister, whoever be Episcopalian, because that way he can have the collar and sort of the frock of a priest, but then they don't actually have to have him follow any of the rules of being a priest, and they don't have to pay attention to details, basically. I don't think it's anything particularly anti-Catholic. But I respect when they choose to make a character Catholic, because there are very specific rules to that. It's kind of like if someone is a devout Jew, that there are very specific rules to that. And you can't just have them say that and then have them ignore all of it. It's much more interesting to see, like, do they observe the Sabbath? Do they eat certain things? And I just think it's a very interesting thing. But the truth is, most writers are much too lazy to actually try and follow through with it. Now, let me see. We've got that. Now, I am going to reach over here, and I'm going to actually pull open my iPad. And I know I'm pausing for a second, and I'm essentially just vamping for time, but I want to get his colors right. I don't like it when a character's colors are just completely off. So we're going to put in Nightcrawler and see what comes up. And no, I'm not talking about the 2014 film. So let's see if I can get something other than the 2014 film, which has a 95% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and that's great. But it is not the Xmen character. Wow, I did not expect. I figured since that character has been around so long that he would... here we go. Now a whole bunch of them are coming up all at once. Perfect. I just want to get some basic colors from that. Put that over there. And as I thought I remembered, his central chest area is red, and his arms and feet are white. And then he's got kind of a very dark blue and like a band of red. And he's had a few different variations on this theme, you might say. The other thing that I'm going to have to be very careful with is that Nightcrawler is blue. And since he is blue, it's a color that can very easily get completely lost in the drawing. So for this deep blue, I'm going to make this some of the base for this. But as you can probably see, like, it almost looks black because it's so dark. Now, one of the retcons that they did later on, they had always said that Nightcrawler was very good at hiding in the shadows, but when they would show him, he would seem to actually disappear into the shadows. Now, obviously, he has what they would describe as indigo skin, which, certainly makes sense that would be easier to hide, but that would not explain why simply standing in a corner that no one would see him. I mean, there are, of course, perfectly real people with darker skin, and they do not disappear in the shadows. And so later what they retconned was that Nightcrawler, the dimension that he teleports through, he actually is surrounded by it ever so slightly. And so when he's in the dark, that dimension is actually surrounding him. And so he tends to fade from view. This is a lighter blue, so I think we're going to use this for Nightcrawler's skin. I like this better because we want to be able to see Nightcrawler, see his awesome tail. This is definitely a lighter blue than what we would use for if I was a professional cartoonist, which I am not. But if I was, I would use a darker color for his skin. But I want him to show up on here. So we're just going to give him a slightly lighter color. I'm going to leave a few places for white there that I can use if I want. And that is a good start. We're going to find ourselves a pretty pure red here for his chest area. Work that in. The opening of X-Men, I think it was Last Stand, I forget the exact title of X-Men 2 movie, opens with Nightcrawler trying to assassinate the president. And of course we realize that this is not of his own free will, that he's been brain whammied. But it's really quite terrifying because, of course, if he was able to teleport, there's very few things that could stop him from gaining access to somewhere like, say, the president, because all he has to do is look through an open door and bamf, there he is. And things are not going to go well for anyone that he's coming after. I'm going to pull out my secondary colors here. A few that I draw upon. Now, unfortunately, I forgot when I set this up to get my grays and my skin tones. Now, fortunately, with Nightcrawler, skin tones are not quite as much of an issue since he has blue skin. But a lot of times, as I've said, I can use the skin tones to do some of the background images and such because they're so light. They go very well because I try not to use really strong colors because they have a tendency to overwhelm the foreground when I use them. So I try to find slightly lighter colors. Here's a pretty good one. I'm going to work this one into this is my peach. This is one of the ones that's definitely starting to go dry, and I've used this for a lot of, very basic Caucasian characters. So it's gotten a good deal of use. And we're going to work in here just a little bit of extra detail so that we have a little bit more texture on the floor there. We're not really worried about the floor, but I think I like that so much I'm going to use that on the cookies. We're going to put some cookies right there. Very nice. Some delicious. What do you think they are? Do you think they're chocolate chip cookies? I think they're probably chocolate chip cookies. Those are a lot of cookies. He's really got quite a score going on there. Since they're chocolate chip, we need to just put some little dots in there. I guess they could technically be raisin, but I don't know if most people really care for raisin cookies. I'm pretty indifferent myself, but I know that if I bite into a raisin cookie when I'm not expecting it, it's It's pretty unpleasant. Now, his BAMF is often shown as a cloud, and this is definitely an area where I would normally use some kind of gray, but since I don't have my grays available to me, I'm going to use a yellow to kind of work that in for the BAMF effect. And what I definitely want to do is whatever I choose for the foreground, I definitely want to keep that consistent with the background, thus implying that he disappeared from over here and reappeared over here. Now this is perfectly fine, but I would like a little more oomph in that, so I think I'm going to add a little orange to it just to give it a little more texture. This was one that I think I used when I was doing the Hulk. It's running low, but I kind of like its little texture that it's got going there. I'm probably going to leave the refrigerator white, though I may add just a little bit of shading if I can find a color that's not too obtrusive. Because after all, refrigerators often are white. And plus, if I make it black, like I've got a black refrigerator, it may be too overpowering. When you have a giant solid black piece, it can be a little bit overwhelming. What I'm really hoping is that I've maybe got a not too obtrusive brown. This is a little darker than I would, if I had my full retinue of browns, I would probably choose something just a little more lighter. But we're going to make do with this. Go through here. Color that in. Now, as Mr. Rogers said, it doesn't matter whether something like this is quote unquote good. What matters is that you have fun doing it and that you get it out in the world. That sometimes you just have to get things out in the world that are inside you. They just need to come out. And I really like the X-Men. And I will never, ever be a professional comic book artist. But does that mean that I should not be able to draw Nightcrawler? Of course not. You can draw whatever you want. You can even share it with other people, like you nice people. And by the way, that is not hyperbole. YouTube has a tremendous reputation for, shall we say, less than kind comments. But I have some of the nicest followers of any YouTuber. You people, I think maybe I have one comment out of all of them that might be considered less than kind, and everyone else, excuse me, up late last night, everyone else has been just incredibly supportive and kind, and gives me lots of suggestion. By the way, if you do have a suggestion for an ASMR video, you can just leave it in the comments. And as I've said before, I never promise that I'm going to do any video, but I will promise to consider it. I will read every comment, and as much as I can, I will respond to every comment. But if you have an idea of something that you think would be fun for me to do, by all means, leave me a comment. And as I'm reaching towards the climax of this drawing, getting close to being done with it, I want to let you know that if you would like this drawing of Nightcrawler, you can simply let me know in the comment thread, and the first person who does so, I will send it to you. You can send me a private message by my email, which is mrcorley@gmail.com, but I can also send it to you later. And when I did the Kylo Ren drawing, which I don't know if you've seen that, but that one was a very popular, very fun one. For Star Wars, a gentleman asked me if I would send it to him, and I did. I sent that to him, and he now has it. I am sure that it is over his mantelpiece with a giant frame in a place of honor. No, I'm just kidding. Of course not. But what I want to let you know is if you'd like this drawing just for funsies, you can leave them in the comments, and I will be more than happy to send it to you. I think one of the final things that makes me such a big fan of Nightcrawler, and of course Longshot too, but other characters that have always attracted me, such as them, is their attitude. Is that Nightcrawler, in many ways, was the heart of the X-Men. He was the kind one, the flamboyant, the one who wanted to be Errol Flynn, fighting villains and saving damsels in distress. And I've always liked that about Nightcrawler. And that's something that I always liked about Longshot. Now, Longshot was more of a fish out of water type of fellow. But he was always very earnest and just wanted everyone to get along, everyone to be happy, and believed that if you just work really hard, that, things will work out. We, of course, know that that is not always the case, unfortunately, but I have a tremendous amount of respect for characters who feel that way. And because I, too, like to believe that things can work out okay. Getting towards the end here, I'm just putting in a few more details just to kind of give it a little bit of definition. I never worked too hard to get my cross-hatchings, gorgeous or anything. I just like to show a little bit of texture to help differentiate the different areas. I'm just going to add just a little bit up here just to kind of show that that's the corner. Spread it out a little bit just to kind of imply that there's a little bit of a shadow there. Maybe even show a little bit of a shadow down here, almost like we're still seeing the shadow that is cast by him appearing from up here. It also helps subtly to draw attention to it. Now what I'm going to do, this camera does not like being moved very much. It's very sensitive, but I'm going to put it right here, and hopefully it will show it appropriately. And I hope that you've enjoyed me drawing this very silly picture of a young Nightcrawler teleporting in to get some cookies, going bamf. And I want you to remember that if there's something that you want to draw, don't worry about whether or not you think you're a great artist. I'll tell you a secret. All artists think they're terrible. I just want you to draw it and have fun. Well, you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon.